week 4 of our tour through conjugal love, married love if you prefer, or conjugal love if you prefer that. This is, and I say married love, this is the Rogers translation, that's what he uses. But anyway, last week it was on the chapter called True Married Love, and Swedenborg gets these tour through the different ages, saying, oh, this is the golden age, the silver, bronze, da, da, da. And we looked at the account of Swedenborg experiencing the golden age society in heaven as to what marriage was like. And oh, it was beautiful, and they gave him this pomegranate, and you know, how could you look at another, you know, Swedenborg and his companion said to the angels there, well, you know, when you see a beautiful woman, doesn't it just kind of excite you full of lust? And he's like, no, it's, I see other women through my wife's eyes, everything's fine. How could I look at another woman lustfully? That's terrible. That's the high point, right? Well, then we're going to look at a low point. So we're going to skip the silver, bronze, and iron and look at this iron mixed with clay age, which is according to this, the current being late 1700s age. And just, you know, as a reminder of these ages, we get this statue in the book of Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of the statue, or the gold head and the silver torso and the bronze belly, the iron legs, and then iron and clay feet and toes. And that's the one we're on today. And it's worth noting, a little tangent here, that a lot of people see this statue as representative of earthly kingdoms. You know, so Babylon, oh, that's the golden age in Persia. And they use all this stuff to say, oh, the rock that comes down and destroys the statue and takes over, that's the Lord's second coming in a literal form. That's not what the new church teaches it to be, but it's worth noting that some people do take it that way. Anyway, so, but this is what we're looking at. Iron and clay feet and toes. And so without any further ado, I shall read you this account, or at least most of it. We'll edit a little bit out for time. So it's the same angel as before, and Swedenborg going along, touring around. And, and they talk about how the meaning of the iron and clay mix is the word falsified. So you take something true and you make it, twist it in its interpretation to make it false. So after these words, I followed his angel guide, and on the way he told me this: these people live in a border region between the south and the west, but at a great distance beyond those who had lived in the previous 4 ages, and also deeper down. So we continued through the south to a region bordering on the west, and we passed through a dreadful forest. For we found pools of water there from which crocodiles raised their heads, gaping at us with jaws open wide and showing their teeth. And between the pools we saw horrible dogs, some of them with 3 heads like Cerberus, some of them with 2 heads, all of them with hideous mouths and watching us with savage eyes as we passed by. Entering the western part of this area, we also saw dragons and leopards, like the little ones described in the book of Revelation. And then the angel said to me, all these wild beasts you've seen are not beasts, but correspondent and thus representative forms of the lusts that motivate the inhabitants we are going to visit. Those hideous dogs represent the lusts themselves, the crocodiles, their deceits and their deceptions, the dragons and leopards, their falsities and corrupt feelings towards the things that have to do with worship. The inhabitants thus represented, however, do not live just the other side of the forest, but beyond a great desert that lies between, to keep them completely away and separate from the inhabitants of the preceding ages. Moreover, they are altogether alien, totally different from those other people. Indeed, they have heads above their breasts, and breasts above their loins, and loins above their feet, like the earliest people, But there is not a bit of gold in their heads, or silver in their breasts, or bronze in their loins. In fact, there is not a bit of just plain iron in their feet. Instead, they have iron mixed with clay in their heads, both of these mixed with bronze in their breasts, and both of those also mixed with silver in their loins, and these mixed with gold in their feet. By this inversion, they have been transformed from human beings into caricatures of human beings, in which nothing inwardly holds together. For what had been uppermost has become lowermost, so that what was the head has become the heel, and vice versa. Viewed from heaven, they look like play actors who turn their bodies upside down, support themselves on their elbows, and thus move about. Or they look like animals that lie upside down on their backs and raise their feet in the air, and digging their heads into the ground, from that position they look up at the sky. We passed through the forest and proceeded into the desert, which was no less horrible. It consisted of piles of rocks with pits in between, out of which crept poisonous snakes and vipers, and from which flew fiery serpents. This whole desert kept sloping downward, and we descended by a long decline, until at last we came to a valley inhabited by the people of that region and age. We saw huts here and there, which finally appeared to come together and be joined into the form of a city. When we went into the city, and behold, the houses were constructed out of charred tree branches mortared together with clay. The roofs were made of black tiles. The streets were irregular, all narrow at first, but widening as they went, becoming finally quite broad and ending in squares. Consequently, there were as many squares as there were streets. Darkness fell as we entered the city, because the sky was not visible. We looked up, therefore, and we were given light by which to see. Then I asked the people I encountered, "Can you see? Because the sky does not appear above you." They replied, "What sort of question is this? We see clearly. We walk in full light." Hearing this, the angel said to me, "Darkness to them is light, and light to them is darkness, as it is for nocturnal birds, for they look downward instead of upward." When we went into some of the shacks here and there, and in each we saw a man with his woman, and we asked whether all of them here lived each in his own house with only one wife. But they replied to this with a hiss, "What do you mean with only one wife? Why not ask whether we have only one harlot? What is a wife but a whore? According to our laws, we are not allowed to commit whoredom with more than just one woman, but it is still not dishonorable or shameful for us to do so with more than one, provided we do it away from the house. We boast about it with each other. In this way, we enjoy license and pleasure more than the polygamists do. Why is having more than one wife denied to us, when it has been permitted in the past and is permitted today in the whole world around us? What is life with just one woman but captivity and imprisonment? But here we break open the bar of this prison, and so rescue ourselves from slavery and set ourselves free. Who is angry with a prisoner if he liberates himself when he can?" To this we replied, "You speak, my friend, like one devoid of religion. What person endowed with any power of reason does not know that adulterous affairs are profane and hellish, and that marriages are sacred and heavenly? Are not adulterous relationships found among devils in hell, and marriages among angels in heaven? Have you not read the 6th commandment? And in Paul, that adulterers can by no means come into heaven." At this our host laughed heartily, and he looked on me as a simpleton, almost even as insane. But that very moment a messenger came running from the headman of the city and said, "Bring the 2 strangers to the city square, and if they will not come voluntarily, drag them there." We saw them under the dark cover of daylight. They have come here in secret. They are spies. The angel said to me, "The reason we seem to be under dark cover to them is that we were in the light of heaven, and the light of heaven to them is darkness, while darkness of hell to them is light. That is because they regard nothing as sinful, not even adultery, and consequently they see falsity altogether as truth. Falsity shines with light in hell in the eyes of satanic spirits, while truth darkens their eyes like the gloom of the night. Then we said to the messenger, "We will not be forced, still less dragged to the city square, but we will go with you voluntarily. We have come to be instructed about marriage, to find out whether or not marriages among you are sacred unions as they were among the people who lived in the gold and silver and copper ages." But they replied, "What do you mean, sacred unions? Are they not deeds of flesh in the night?" Then we began to answer, "Are they also not deeds of the Spirit? And what the flesh does impelled by the Spirit, is that not spiritual? Moreover, everything that the Spirit does, it does from a marriage of goodness and truth. Is it not this spiritual marriage which enters into the natural marriage that exists between a husband and wife?" To this the so-called wise man replied, "You probe and refine the matter too much. You leap over rational considerations to spiritual ones. Who can begin there and then descend and thus form a judgment about anything? Perhaps you have the wings like an eagle and can soar to the uppermost regions of the sky and look down on such matters, but we cannot." So we then asked them to tell us from what height or region to which the ideas of their minds flew aloft, whether they knew or were able to know that such a thing exists as the married love of one man with one wife, into which have been gathered all the blessings, felicities, delights, and gratifications and pleasures of heaven. Moreover, that this love comes from the Lord according to his people's reception of the goodness and truth from him, thus according to the state of the church. Hearing this, they turned away and said, "These men are crazy. They can go to outer space with their rational faculties, form empty conjectures, and shower us with nutty speculations." Afterwards, they turned around to us and said, "We will give a straight answer to your airy conjectures and dreams. What does married love have in common with religion and with being inspired by God? Does that love not exist in everyone according to the condition of his sexual powers? Is it not found among people who are outside the church as well as people who are in the church? Among Gentiles as well as Christians? In fact, among impious people as well as pious ones? Does the vigor of that love in everyone not come either from heredity or good health, or from the temperance of life, or from the warmth of the climate? And can it not be strengthened and stimulated by drugs? Is the same love not found in animals, especially in birds which mate in pairs? Is that love not a matter of the flesh? What does a matter of the flesh have to do with the spiritual state of the church? Does that love with a wife in its ultimate expression differ one single bit from the love of a harlot in its ultimate expression? Is the lust not the same and the delight the same? Is it harmful, therefore, to trace the origin of married love from ecclesiastical sanctities?" When we heard this, we said to them, "You are reasoning from the heat of lust and not from married love. You do not know at all what married love is, because among you that love is cold. We are convinced by what you have said that you have come from the age that is named after and consists of iron and clay, which do not cohere, according to the book of Daniel. For you have made married love and licentious love the same thing. Can these two cohere any more than iron and clay? People believe you are wise and call you wise, yet you are anything but wise." Inflamed with anger at these words, they began to cry out and call the crowd to throw us out. Then, by the power given to us by the Lord, we stretched out our hands, and suddenly fiery serpents, vipers, and poisonous snakes came from the desert, and dragons too, and they invaded and filled the city, so that the inhabitants became frightened and fled away. The angel said to me, new people keep coming from earth to this region every day, and the previous inhabitants are by turns removed and cast down into gulfs in the west, which at a distance look like lakes of fire and brimstone. The people there are all adulterers, both spiritually and naturally. Not a pretty picture. What's the point of reading a story like that? It's not just to scare you. The point is to show the difference between thinking naturally and thinking spiritually. And the same thing in this story happens in the world today, where natural reasoning gets passed off as wisdom. This guy is saying, oh, look, birds, they mate in pairs. It's the same thing with us. And people make this argument that just because two people have a sexual relation, that we are just like animals. That's an argument we hear in culture, that we are just animals. We can't be blamed for the attractions and desires and things that we have. We're just chemicals, right? We're just this complex composition of chemicals, reactions happening. And that gets passed off as wisdom. The whole point of this story is to say, no, your humanity depends on you seeing that you're not just an animal. Your humanity, your true self, relies on you seeing that you can be something more. That you got to think spiritually. The problem is when you start thinking that you're an animal, if that's your starting position, each subsequent decision you make on down the line takes you further and further away from the truth. If you start believing that you're something more, that humanity is something more than just an animal, each decision you make can bring you closer to the truth. It's a big deal. And we have to be able to see when people are arguing from the senses, when they're arguing from the lust of their desires and not from a higher spiritual perspective. There is a difference between sex and making love. There's a difference. It's similar in the motions of the act, but it's not the same thing. And that's really important. These guys don't see that. Hopefully, we can. Amen.